In this video, we're going to do a couple proportions word problems. So remember, a proportion is just a statement with two equal ratios in it. And remember, a ratio is just a comparison of two things. So when we read our word problems that we'll solve with proportions, we're looking for two different units or two different things that are being compared. The word problem also always gives us one complete ratio, one thing that they're telling us is equal, and they'll leave the second ratio complete. So what we'll do is we'll use the proportion and the three numbers that we know to find the missing number that we don't know. So let's read this first problem. It says Amy receives 44 text messages for every 2 phone calls. If Amy receives 22 phone calls yesterday, how many texts did she get? So because this problem's asking us to compare text messages and phone calls, I know I want to set up a proportion. So you want to draw this on your paper and then you want to put your labels in front. What words or units are they asking us to compare? Well, they said that Amy receives 44 text messages for every 2 phone calls. So it sounds like we're comparing text messages and phone calls. So now we want to take the numbers from the word problem that are given to us and we're going to fill in the proportion and we're going to have one number missing and we will go ahead and cross multiply to solve for that missing number. So in the problem it tells us that Amy received 44 text messages for every 2 phone calls. And then the question says how many texts did she get if she received 22 phone calls? So I know this number 44 is going to go here first. And she receives 44 text messages for every 2 phone calls. So we're saying that 44 text messages is equal to 2 phone calls. We also know that Amy received 22 phone calls yesterday, and we want to use that information to figure out how many texts she would have gotten yesterday. So because this 22 represents the number of phone calls, I'm going to write 22 down below because you always want to make sure that you're lining up your numbers with the correct label. So because this is talking about phone calls, it will go in the bottom. Now, the last thing I need to do is fill in the spot for the missing number. I know that she got 44 text messages for every 2 phone calls, but now I want to know how many text messages she would get for 22 phone calls. So I don't know this number here. I'm going to go ahead and replace it with X. Now that you've set up your proportion, you're ready to solve. So remember, you want to cross multiply the numbers that are across from you. So that's going to be 44 times 22, and I can use my Desmos calculator. And then I'm going to divide by that last number that's across from X. So what's across from X? 2. So let's go ahead and use Desmos to solve. Again, we're going to cross multiply 44 times 22, and our answer is 968. So now I'm going to take my answer and I'm going to divide that by 2. I'm always going to divide by the number that's across from X. When I do that, I get that my answer is 484. So what does that mean in this problem? If X equals 484, well, we're saying that Amy received 484 text messages. So we can circle that because that's our final answer. The last step is always to remember to clear out your calculator before you move on to the next problem. So the next question says, 2 hikers were able to cover 12 miles on a trail in just 4 hours. If the total length of the trail is 20 miles, how many hours will it take the hikers to complete the whole trip? Well, as I read this problem, I notice that we're comparing miles and hours. So this sounds like a proportion word problem to me. So in my work, I'm going to set up a proportion where I'll write my equal ratios. And I want to go ahead and in the front of those, fill out the labels, the words that we're comparing. So again, we noticed in the problem that we were comparing miles and hours. So we want to set up our proportion and we're comparing miles to hours as well. So let's go back to the problem and find the first complete ratio that they gave us. It says that 12 miles on a trail they did in just 4 hours. So they're telling us that they did 12 miles in 4 hours. So we want to write 12 over 4. Again, that's because I wrote miles in the top and hours in the bottom. If I wrote these differently, I would set those numbers up differently. You just want to match your number to your label. It says if the total length of the trail is 20 miles, so that's the third number that they gave us, how many hours will it take the hikers to complete the trip? So what we don't know is the number of hours. We don't know this. That's going to be our X. But we want to know how many hours it will take us to do that 20 miles. So our 20 goes in the top, again, because it's miles and we're setting up miles in the top. So now that we've got our proportion completely filled in with our 3 numbers and our missing number, we're going to go ahead and solve for X. To solve your proportion, we're going to cross multiply. So we're cross multiplying the 2 numbers that we see across from each other, 20 times 4. And we get 80. And then we're dividing by that number that's across from X. So we're dividing by 12. So we're going to take our answer, which was 80, and we're going to divide that by 12 to figure out the value of X. So our answer is a decimal. So X equals, it's going to take the hikers about 6.6, repeating, so you can put the repeat sign or the ... at the end, but it's going to take them approximately 6.6 hours. And then you can circle your final answer. So remember, when you're working with these problems in the Desmos calculator, always clear out your calculator before you start the next problem. The next problem says, Chef Arthur's brownie recipe uses 1/3 cup of flour for one batch of 16 brownies. If Chef Arthur needs to prepare 96 brownies, how many cups of flour will he need? So again, I think this is a proportion word problem because I can tell we're comparing 2 different things. We're comparing cups of flour and brownies. And we want to know how many cups of flour we'll need if we're going to prepare 96 brownies. So they gave us one complete ratio again, and we need to use that to find the missing part of the other ratio. So what is it asking us to compare here? So you could write cups or you could write flour here, whatever makes more sense, but we're comparing cups of flour to brownies. I always like to start with the complete ratio, the one that they told me the 2 parts together. So they told me 1/3 cup of flour was used for a batch of 16 brownies. So I know that when I write 1/3, I'm going to write that with cups of flour, and that made 16 brownies. So the 16 is going to go right underneath next to the label that says brownies. Now the next part says, if Chef Arthur needs to prepare 96 brownies, how many cups of flour will he need? So this number 96 is talking about brownies. So do I want to put it in the top or the bottom? I'm going to write it in the bottom because that's where all my numbers that represent the number of brownies should go. Now, I don't know how many cups of flour I need for that amount yet, but I can cross multiply now to solve. So don't worry about this fraction because you've got Desmos to help you. We're literally going to do 1/3 times 96. And we get 32. And then remember, you always divide that by the number across from X. So you're dividing by 16. So we're going to take 32 and divide by 16. And when we do that, we get our final answer is 2. So X equals 2 here. And 2 represents what? If you forgot what your unit should be, go back to your setting up of your problem. We were missing this X. We were missing the cups of flour. So you could also look in the problem. The question was saying, how many cups of flour will he need? So our answer is X equals 2 cups or 2 cups of flour. We can go ahead and circle our final answer. And then we always want to remember to clear out our Desmos calculator before we move on to the next problem. Our last problem for this video, a map is drawn to scale where 2 centimeters on the map represents 25 miles. So they're telling us in the problem that 2 centimeters equals 25 miles. If a road between two cities is 9 centimeters on a map, what is the real distance between the two cities? So it doesn't tell us if we're asking for miles or centimeters here, but we kind of have to imply it. If it wants to know the real distance, it wants to know what that would be in miles. Another way you could tell that is because they told us that it's 9 centimeters on the map, and we know centimeters was the units that we were using on the map, and miles was the units that we were using in real life. So the real distance is going to be the miles that we're looking for. So because we're comparing centimeters and miles, we're going to want to set up a proportion. So you would want to draw your two lines with your equal sign in the middle to represent your two equal ratios. And we want to compare the units, centimeters and miles. So again, I always like to start with the first complete ratio here. The first ratio they gave us was that 2 centimeters represents 25 miles. So they're saying that this 2 centimeters here equals this 25 miles. They're saying that those are equal. So what we're going to do is set those up with each other down below. So I'm going to write my 2 centimeters in the top and my 25 miles down below. So I'm going to color code miles in green and write 25. Now the next part of the problem tells us the road between the two cities is 9 centimeters on the map. So again, I want to keep everything organized. So everything with centimeters, I want to write in the top since that's where I put the label centimeters. So my 9 would go in the top. And that last number that we're missing, you can go back to the question, what is the real distance? So it's asking us, what is the distance in miles? So since we don't know this number, we're going to go ahead and write an X here. So now you're ready to cross multiply and then divide by that number across from X. So we're going to multiply 9 times 25. And I'm going to use my Desmos to help me keep moving. And I get 225. And then I need to divide that by that last number that's diagonal or across from X. So I'm going to take 225 and I'm dividing that by 2. When I do that, I get 112.5. So we're saying X, our miles, the real distance between the two cities is 112.5 miles. Make sure that decimal really stands out. And then we can go ahead and abbreviate miles, MI. And then you are done. You can box in your final answer and clear out your calculator. Hope this video was helpful.